Chapter 918. The woman in white did not get up. After fusing with the flame of life, her slightly aged face exuded vitality once more. Her skin was crystal clear, and her hair was like a waterfall. However, at this moment, her face was full of helplessness. The two Kirin army soldiers and two maids were trying to persuade her, but she did not seem to hear them. Her eyes were full of determination. Time passed by breath. At this moment, whether it was Ren Wushuang's group, Zhuge Mingyang's group, or other unrelated people, they all felt that time was passing very slowly. It had only been a single morning, but it felt as long as a few decades. Finally, noon was coming. It was early summer, and the weather was not too hot. However, many people were already sweating. Everyone looked at the central square and gradually quieted down. Their hands were clenched tightly together. A tense atmosphere pervaded the air. In fact, many people did not know what they were nervous about. This was about Qin Feiyang's execution. What did it have to do with them? Why were they nervous? However, they still felt that they were out of breath. It was very oppressive. Whoosh! Suddenly, a white-haired old man descended on the square. Next to him was a middle-aged man in golden armor. The moment the imperial tutor appeared, there was a vast and mighty pressure that surged out in all directions. Greetings, Grand Master. Under the pressure, the people gathered around the square, including the Invincible Black Army, were all afraid and knelt down to worship him. Yes, the Grand Master nodded, and then looked at the man in golden armor next to him. The man in golden armor quickly took out a wooden armchair from his cosmos bag and placed it on the ground. The Grand Master waved his sleeves and turned around to sit on the wooden armchair. The man in golden armor took out a tea table, a teapot and teacups. After placing them one by one, he began to make tea for the Grand Master. The man in golden armor was none other than the commander of the Invincible Black Army. This old bastard really knows how to enjoy life. In a restaurant in the south, a dark-skinned young man in linen clothes stood in front of the window. He looked at the Grand Master, who was sitting on the wooden armchair, with a cold look in his eyes. It was Lu Zheng. Whoosh! Suddenly, two more people suddenly appeared in the room. Lu Zheng sensed their auras and turned to look at them. He said unhappily, "Uncle Hey, second grandpa, why are you only here now? Isn't it supposed to be executed at noon? What's the hurry?" The burly man rolled his eyes, walked to the window and asked, "What's the situation now? Little cousin hasn't appeared yet, but..." Lu Zheng frowned when he said this. "But what?" The burly man and the sackcloth old man looked at him suspiciously. "Yesterday, I had nothing to do, so I went to the nearby restaurants and found a lot of unfathomable auras." At the same time, the people in the nearby restaurants and the people around the square all looked up at the void above the square. The state preceptor also looked up, but he immediately withdrew his gaze. He picked up the tea that the Invincible Black Army commander had brewed for him and tasted it. Whoosh! Under the gaze of thousands of people, two figures appeared in the sky above the square. One of them was the commander of the Kirin army. The other was naturally Qin Feiyang. However, at this moment, Qin Feiyang's hands and feet were tied with a black iron chain. The iron chain was as thick as a baby's arm. It shone with a black light and emitted an obscure aura. It was an iron chain made of divine gravity iron, which could imprison people's battle chi and strength. The commander of the Kirin army landed in the center of the square with Qin Feiyang. Although he had been locked in the prison of God for several days, he had been resting in the castle. Therefore, his mental appearance was the same as usual. The only difference was that his eyes were colder than before. He stood in the center of the square and looked around at the crowd. He shook his head and said, "So many people have come to watch. You really think highly of me, Qin Feiyang." The state preceptor chuckled as he sipped his tea. "That's right. You're the first person to have shocked the entire imperial capital during the execution. Don't you feel proud?" Qin Feiyang turned around and looked at the state preceptor. He looked very calm. "Are you afraid?" The state preceptor looked up at him and asked. Qin Feiyang smiled and walked toward the state preceptor. As he walked, the iron chain on his feet made clanking sounds. "You can still be so calm when you're about to die. This courage alone is enough to make people respect you." In the pavilion where Zhuge Mingyang was, a young man in white looked at Qin Feiyang with a trace of admiration in his eyes. Humph, this is not calmness. This is stubbornness. Zhuge Mingyang snorted with a strong sense of hatred in his eyes. Brother Zhuge, aren't you always calm no matter what you encounter? Why do you look a little anxious now? The young man in white was stunned and looked at Zhuge Mingyang in confusion. Hearing this, the others also looked at Zhuge Mingyang suspiciously. Indeed, it was as the white-clothed youth had said. When facing Qin Feiyang, Zhuge Mingyang had become somewhat different from before. To put it nicely, he didn't have his usual demeanor. To put it bluntly, Zhuge Mingyang's current behavior was a little despicable. Was it because of the crown prince? But that didn't make sense. Zhuge Mingyang used to work for the crown prince, but that was all. Even if the crown prince was killed by Qin Feiyang, Zhuge Mingyang wouldn't lose anything. Was it necessary for him to hate Qin Feiyang so much? Or could it be that the relationship between Zhuge Mingyang and the crown prince wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface? But regarding this, Zhuge Mingyang didn't give any explanation. In the plaza, Qin Feiyang walked over to the imperial tutor's side and looked at the Iron Black Corps commander, who was standing there motionlessly, as he calmly said, "You haven't forgotten about how you ambushed me in the Forgotten Continent, right?" The Invincible Black Army's general's eyes slightly trembled. Although Qin Feiyang was now a prisoner, and although he was stronger than Qin Feiyang, when he looked at Qin Feiyang's eyes, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fear. "Looks like you haven't forgotten." Qin Feiyang chuckled and looked down at the state preceptor. He said with a smile, "I haven't eaten or drunk for a few days. My mouth is a little dry." "Impudent. Do you know what kind of situation you're in right now?" The Invincible Black Army's general shouted. The state preceptor raised his head and looked at the Invincible Black Army's general. He said unhappily, "Is it your turn to speak?" "I'm sorry." The Invincible Black Army's general quickly lowered his head. "If you want to flatter someone, you have to look at the right time. You can't do it at any time." Qin Feiyang looked at him mockingly. "You're right." The state preceptor nodded and smiled. He didn't give the Invincible Black Army's general any face. When the Invincible Black Army's general failed to sneak attack on Qin Feiyang, he was very angry. He raised his head and looked at the sky. There was still a little time before noon. Then he glanced at the Invincible Black Army's general and said, "Why aren't you pouring tea for His Highness?" "Yes." The Invincible Black Army's general quickly took out an armchair from his Cosmos bag and placed it next to Qin Feiyang. Then, he quickly took out a teacup and poured tea for Qin Feiyang respectfully. Qin Feiyang sat down on the wooden armchair, picked up the teacup, and took a sip from it. The tea tasted good and left a nice fragrance in his mouth. The state preceptor smiled and asked, "How is it?" "Not bad." Qin Feiyang nodded. "Haha." Chapter 919. Qin Feiyang nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, life is more important than anything else." The state preceptor asked with a smile, "Then tell this old man frankly, have you ever regretted what you did?" "What things?" "Killing the princes? Or challenging the emperor? Or going against you?" Qin Feiyang asked back. The state preceptor smiled faintly and said, "Do you still need this old man to explain? You should be well aware of it." Qin Feiyang sighed softly and said, "I'm not good at guessing riddles." The state preceptor shook his head and laughed. The two were like old friends, sitting in the square drinking tea and chatting, without any sense of nervousness. In the private room, the linen-clothed old man looked at Qin Feiyang from afar, his old face full of admiration, and suddenly said, "Zheng." "What?" Lu Zheng turned his head and looked at the linen-clothed old man suspiciously. The linen-clothed old man asked, "If it were you in such a desperate situation, would you still be so calm?" Lu Zheng fell silent. In all honesty, he couldn't do it. Not to mention him. Perhaps no one could be as calm as Qin Feiyang in the face of the imminent beheading crisis. He had to admit that he had underestimated this little cousin of his all this time. In the square, the state preceptor looked up at the sun again, put down the teacup and looked at Qin Feiyang, and said with a faint smile, "It's almost time. If you have any last words, quickly say them." Qin Feiyang said, "No last words, but I have a wish." "What wish?" The state preceptor asked. Qin Feiyang said, "Can you tear off your disguise and let me see your original appearance?" The state preceptor raised his eyebrows without a trace. Qin Feiyang raised the corner of his mouth and said jokingly, "It must be very tiring to pretend to be a good old man in front of the world all day long." The state preceptor chuckled, but his smile had become a little stiff. Qin Feiyang said with a smile, "It seems that my words have made you very unhappy. Why should this old man care about the words of a dying man?" The state preceptor smiled indifferently. "Die. To me, death is not scary. The scariest thing is that I won't be able to see the person I miss the most before I die." Qin Feiyang slowly got up and looked in the direction of the imperial palace. A hint of mockery flashed across the imperial tutor's eyes as he thought to himself, "Don't look forward to it. Your mother won't come." Qin Feiyang frowned. The imperial preceptor sent a voice transmission. "You still don't know, right? In order to plead for you, your mother has been kneeling in Bright Sky Palace for an entire morning." "What?" Qin Feiyang trembled both physically and mentally. In the depths of his calm heart, a monstrous rage suddenly surged. Bright Heaven Palace was no longer the Bright Heaven Palace of the past. It was now the residence of the current Celestial Empress and the little prince. For him, his mother had actually knelt in Bright Heaven Palace. He could imagine how much humiliation his mother had suffered. He couldn't stand it. "Are you very angry? But unfortunately, you can't do anything now. But don't worry. After you die and I get Chang Shui in the castle, I won't make things difficult for her. At most, I'll just cripple her cultivation." The imperial preceptor secretly sent a voice transmission. After that, he no longer paid attention to Qin Feiyang. He picked up the teacup and tasted it with a smile. Qin Feiyang suddenly lowered his head and stared at the imperial preceptor. His eyes flashed with shocking killing intent. "The time has come." At this time, the commander of the Invincible Black Army said indifferently. Qin Feiyang closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes again, his eyes were dead silent. "Let's go." The commander of the Invincible Black Army stepped forward and grabbed Qin Feiyang's shoulder from behind. "Get your dirty hands off me. I can walk by myself," Qin Feiyang said coldly. He slapped the commander's arm away and strode toward the center of the square. The commander of the Invincible Black Army sneered and turned to look at the imperial preceptor. "My lord, this subordinate will personally behead Qin Feiyang." "Okay." The imperial preceptor nodded. The commander of the Invincible Black Army's eyes flashed with killing intent. He quickly caught up with Qin Feiyang and said to himself, "I didn't want to target you, but I have no choice." Qin Feiyang said expressionlessly, "Just say what you want to say. Don't beat around the bush. I know you too well. If you don't die, I'll definitely die in your hands. Because I almost killed you in the past. So, I can only feel at ease if I personally behead you." The commander of the Invincible Black Army said. "You're quite aware of it." Qin Feiyang was surprised. "How can you survive in the Imperial Palace if you're not aware of it?" The commander of the Invincible Black Army sneered. The Kirin Army's commander had been standing in the center of the square. Seeing Qin Feiyang and the commander of the Invincible Black Army, he slightly frowned but didn't say anything. "Kneel." When Qin Feiyang walked to the center of the square, the commander of the Invincible Black Army shouted with a cold face. "Kneel. In this world, except for my mother, no one is qualified to make me kneel," Qin Feiyang said proudly. "Stubborn." The commander of the Invincible Black Army was furious. He reached out his hand and grabbed the back of Qin Feiyang's head, pushing Qin Feiyang down to the ground. However, Qin Feiyang was like an iron pine, standing proudly on the ground. His legs didn't bend at all. Seeing this, the Kirin Army's commander couldn't bear it. He turned his head and looked at the state master, but found that the state master pretended not to see it. "Kneel." The commander of the Invincible Black Army was even angrier. He kicked Qin Feiyang's calf. Qin Feiyang immediately bent his legs and kneeled on the ground. The commander of the Invincible Black Army showed a trace of disdain. "How dare you be so arrogant in front of me? Do you really think you're still the 14th prince?" However, when Qin Feiyang's knees were about to touch the ground, Qin Feiyang stood up abruptly. "What?" The commander of the Invincible Black Army was stunned. Then he became angry and kicked Qin Feiyang's legs again. Stop! The Kirin Army's commander couldn't stand it anymore. He stepped beside Qin Feiyang and pushed the commander of the Invincible Black Army away with his palm. What are you doing? The commander of the Invincible Black Army kept stepping back. After he stabilized his body, he stared at the Kirin Army in shock and anger. Although Qin Feiyang has been removed from his position as a prince, he still has the blood of His Majesty in his body. Don't you think you're being too careless? The Kirin Army's commander said with a sullen face. The commander of the Invincible Black Army raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, His Majesty has said that he is no longer a member of the royal family. Now you're trying to stop me. Are you trying to give him a chance to escape? How dare you? Who gave you the guts to speak to this commander like this? The Kirin Army's commander was furious. Although they were both commanders, the commander of the Kirin Army had a higher position in the imperial palace than the commander of the Invincible Black Army. If it was before, he would have slapped the commander of the Invincible Black Army. But it was different now. Now that the commander of the Invincible Black Army was with the state preceptor, he had to consider the state preceptor's face. Even so, the commander of the Invincible Black Army was a bit scared when he saw the Kirin Army's commander was angry. The Kirin Army's commander is right. Qin Feiyang has the blood of the emperor in his body. Let's leave him some dignity. The state preceptor glanced at the Kirin Army's commander and said, Yes. The commander of the Invincible Black Army bowed and replied. Then, he looked at the Kirin Army's commander and said coldly, Are you satisfied now? Can you step aside? The Kirin Army's commander raised his eyebrows and walked away. However, he secretly sent a voice transmission to Qin Feiyang. Why don't you escape now? Now that they had left the prison of God, Qin Feiyang could hide in the castle and slowly find a chance to escape. But now, Qin Feiyang didn't seem to have such a plan. If I escape now, they will use my mother to threaten me again. I don't want to put my mother in danger again, Qin Feiyang said to himself. Alas, if Her Majesty could hear this, I believe she would be very happy. Don't worry. I will take good care of your friends in the future. I will also persuade His Majesty to treat Her Majesty better. The Kirin Army's commander sighed deeply and sent a voice transmission. Thank you. Qin Feiyang thanked him secretly. Then, he glanced at the crowd in the square and slowly closed his eyes. At this moment he didn't fear death at all. He was very calm and ordinary. He even felt relieved from the bottom of his heart. Since he was 10 years old, he had been struggling to survive. He didn't have the happiness and laughter that other children had. He only had Uncle Yuanbo by his side. But in the end, Uncle Yuanbo also left him, and he became a person. He had been really tired all these years. He hated everyone and even God. Why was it so unfair to him? He tried hard to change everything and take back everything that he had lost. But, in the face of the supreme imperial power, he felt deeply powerless. Maybe in some people's eyes, he was a sign of incompetence. But after so many years, he really couldn't hold on any longer. He wasn't a perfect person, and there was no perfect person in the world. He also had a weak side. If it were anyone else, they would have probably collapsed a long time ago after encountering the setbacks and bumps in Qin Feiyang's life. It wasn't easy for him to hold on until now and only admit defeat. Clang! Suddenly, along with a deafening metallic sound, a golden halberd appeared in front of the commander of the Invincible Black Army. The halberd was 6 feet long and looked like it was made of gold. The blade of the halberd emitted a piercing light. At this moment, the square fell into a dead silence. Everyone held their breath and looked at the commander of the Invincible Black Army. The commander of the Invincible Black Army stood behind Qin Feiyang and reached out his hand to grab the halberd. Then he slowly raised it. Grandpa, Feiyang can't die. Can you think of a way to save him? Ren Wushuang looked at this scene and tears came out of his eyes. Shuang. This is the emperor's order. You can't go against it. The old master sighed. Sigh. Dong Xingyang and the others also sighed. As the saying goes, even a vicious tiger won't eat its cubs. However, this current emperor was actually ruthless enough to kill his own son. How heartless. It was no wonder that Qin Feiyang hated his father so much. However, there was one person who didn't look worried at all. There was even a faint smile on his face. This person was Lu Xingchen. Brother Qin, isn't it too early to be free now? My plan can't be carried out without you, he muttered to himself, and raised his head to look at a restaurant in the east. Mu Qing and the others were standing in front of the window, staring at the central square. Mu Qing also raised her head and looked at Lu Xingchen, as if she had sensed his gaze. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "Do you know? Actually, my name is also Qin Haotian." It was probably the smile on Qin Feiyang's face that infected the little boy, and the little boy was not as scared as before. He asked timidly, "Really?" His voice was very young, and his words were somewhat vague and difficult to understand. It was obvious that he had just learned to speak. "Really? So the two of us are very fated." Qin Feiyang nodded and smiled, reaching out to pick up the little boy. Seeing this, the current empress, the emperor, the commander of the Kirin army, and Qin Feiyang's mother, all had their hearts in their throats. They were afraid that Qin Feiyang would kill the little prince on impulse. "Big brother, what is fate?" The little prince, who seemed to have completely put aside his fear, looked at Qin Feiyang curiously and asked confusedly. After all, he was a child, and his mind was relatively simple. Seeing Qin Feiyang's amiable look, he was not afraid. "It is fate that you and I met. It is also fate that we were born in the same place," Qin Feiyang said with a smile. The little prince said in surprise, "Big brother was also born here?" "Yes. I used to live here like you." Qin Feiyang nodded. "Are you also father's child? But why haven't I seen you before?" The little prince asked innocently. Qin Feiyang glanced at the emperor, looked at the little boy, and nodded. "Yes, we were born of the same father, but our fates were different. I was abandoned." "Then you are my brother?" the little prince asked. "Brother?" Qin Feiyang's body stiffened. The word brother seemed to have touched his heartstrings. "Brother, can you tell me why father abandoned you? It feels so complicated." The little prince said again. "Yes, it's very complicated. You are still young, and you won't understand even if I tell you." Qin Feiyang sighed deeply, then rubbed the little prince's head, and said with a smile, "I have a few words for you to tell father. Be good and don't move." "Okay." The little prince nodded, with an innocent smile on his face. Qin Feiyang looked up at the emperor, and his eyes instantly became cold. He said, "I don't ask for much, just tell me why you tried to kill me back then." The mysterious lady and the other two had stopped, but they surrounded the emperor. When the emperor heard this, he pondered for a moment, looked at Qin Feiyang, and said, "What if I don't say it?" Qin Feiyang said, "For the current me other than my mother, there is no family to speak of. You should know what I will do." "So you plan to continue to harm your brother?" Suddenly, a hoarse voice sounded. Swish. Immediately after, a white figure descended above Bright Sky Palace. It was an old man, wearing a white robe, white hair and a white beard. He exuded an otherworldly aura. Qin Feiyang had seen this person before. It was the old man guarding the pagoda, Old Man Qin. "Brother." "Mother." At the same time, Qin Feiyang's angry roar sounded. He clenched his hands, glanced at the emperor, and turned to look at the woman in white. His eyes softened, and he said with a smile, "Mother, don't say any more. It's meaningless." "Yes. What's the point of saying this now? Tian it's mother who let you be born in this world. But mother couldn't protect you well, and let you suffer from torture and suffering since you were a child. Tian mother is sorry." The woman in white closed her eyes in despair. Her pale face was full of self-blame. "No." Qin Feiyang shook his head, smiled and rubbed the little prince's head and said, "Go back to your mother's side." After that he put the little prince on the ground. No one expected that Qin Feiyang would let the little prince go like this, including the emperor and the current empress. "Son, come here." When she came back to her senses, the current empress immediately waved to the little prince. Her face was full of urgency. Qin Feiyang ignored her and turned to the woman in white. However, the little prince didn't run to his mother. He looked around for a while, and finally looked at Qin Feiyang's back, and then looked at the emperor, and asked in a childish voice, "Father, what did you do to brother? Why is brother so sad now?" He was still young and didn't know what life was, let alone talent and bloodline. But he could see that this strange brother was very sad now. So, he asked without hesitation. But in the face of a child's question, no one present answered for a moment. Because they didn't know how to answer. The emperor was even more at a loss. Qin Feiyang's body also stiffened. He turned around, and walked in front of the little prince. He lowered his head and looked at the little guy. "Brother." The little prince looked at him innocently. Qin Feiyang squatted down, reached out and gently grabbed the little prince's shoulder, and said with a smile, "Remember my words. If you want to survive in the imperial palace, you have to be wary of everyone, including your father." The fact that he said this proved that he approved of this little brother. "Why?" the little prince asked suspiciously. "You'll understand when you grow up." Qin Feiyang rubbed the little prince's forehead, got up and walked to the woman in white without looking back. The current empress also rushed up, held the little prince, and hid behind Elder Qin and the others. When Qin Feiyang walked to the woman in white, the woman in white raised her hand, stroked Qin Feiyang's face, and murmured with tears in her eyes, "Tian'er, it's all my fault. Can you forgive me?" Looking at his mother, Qin Feiyang couldn't help but feel a dull pain in his heart. The anger in his heart also became more and more vigorous. He reached out, held his mother in his arms and comforted her. "Mother, it's not your fault. You don't have to apologize to me. I'm the one who should apologize." They did not expect that Qin Feiyang would destroy the power of his bloodline. One had to know, once the bloodline was destroyed, Qin Feiyang would not only lose his previous talent, but also the foundation he had laid before would collapse, and he would even bleed to death. Chapter 926. Heaven and earth were silent, and the gods were silent. For example, Yiglao, the middle-aged man, old Qin, and the three fake gods who appeared later looked at Qin Feiyang with extremely complicated emotions in their eyes. Crippling his own bloodline power, such an extremely terrifying act. If it were them, they wouldn't dare to do it. Although they were all fake gods who dominated a region, although they and Qin Feiyang were basically enemies, Qin Feiyang's behavior at this moment made them unable to help but feel a sense of admiration. Without a little bit of perseverance, it was absolutely impossible to do such a thing. Feiyang, somewhere in the void, Ren Wushuang, the old man, and the others stood in Lu Xingchen's space artifact, looking at Qin Feiyang outside. Their expressions were full of worry and pain. At the same time, their hearts were filled with indignation. Why did the emperor treat Qin Feiyang like this? Could it be that Qin Feiyang was not his biological son? This was also cruel and unfair to him. If the emperor was willing to show half of the care and concern for Qin Feiyang wouldn't have come to this point today. Even Lu Xingchen felt deeply unworthy for Qin Feiyang. Wasn't it just because of one sentence? Was it necessary to do such a stupid thing? He didn't know how to evaluate Qin Feiyang now. Was it stupid? Or was it courage? No. It was definitely stupid. And it was hopelessly stupid. Because such an act would only cause pain to those close to him, and delight his enemies. Why was he so stupid? Why? For example, Qin Feiyang's mother, at this moment, was like a desperate old woman, constantly crying out in grief, her face full of sadness. Woo-woo. Even the heavens seemed to be moved by her. Above the imperial capital, a gust of wind gradually blew. Dark clouds surged from the distance. The sky that was originally shining with the sun gradually fell into darkness. Crack. Crash. Not long after, in the sky lightning flashed and thunder rumbled and the wind howled. The rain poured down in torrents. What's going on? Why is it raining all of a sudden? People in the imperial capital looked at the sky in puzzlement. What a strong sense of sadness. That sadness came from the imperial palace. What happened there? Ling Yu and the other three stood in front of the window, looking in the direction of the imperial palace. Their brows were full of confusion. In another restaurant, Zhuge Mingyang was also standing in front of the window, looking at the torrential rain outside, for a long time without a word. Suddenly, he opened a portal, and appeared in the sky above the palace. What's going on? Looking at Qin Feiyang's current appearance, his eyes were filled with bewilderment. The commander of the Qilin army sighed. He crippled his own bloodline power. Zhuge Mingyang was dumbstruck. But now, he had actually crippled the power of the bloodline. Was he crazy? Zhuge Mingyang glared at Qin Feiyang and shouted, "Do you think you can get everyone's sympathy by doing this?" "I don't want to get anyone's sympathy. I just don't want to owe him," Qin Feiyang said lightly. "Don't want to owe him?" Zhuge Mingyang was stunned. He turned to look at the emperor, and immediately understood. "You are no longer worthy to be my opponent, Zhuge Mingyang." He shook his head, turned around, and retreated to the side in silence. "Is that so?" Qin Feiyang muttered. Blood was still flowing. His face was getting paler and paler. The merged fire of life was frantically repairing his blood vessels. But every time it was repaired, his blood vessels would rupture again. Time passed breath by breath. There was not much blood left in his body. The ground under his feet was dyed red with blood. He raised his head and looked coldly at the emperor. The heavy rain poured on his body, making him a little cold. But looking at the emperor's indifferent face, his heart was even colder. "Is this the ending you want?" The masked old man standing behind the emperor looked at Qin Feiyang, whose breath was getting weaker and weaker, and asked in a low voice. But the person he asked was not Qin Feiyang, but the emperor. But the emperor did not answer. Although Feiyang hated you before, in fact, deep in his heart, he still longed for the love and care of you as a father. And now he has truly given up on you. He has completely given up on you. The masked old man shook his head and sighed. The emperor frowned and asked without looking back, "Who are you? Why do you know him so well?" "Me." The masked old man pondered for a moment and said lightly, "You will know in the future." After that, he lowered his head to look at Qin Feiyang again, his old eyes filled with love. Plop! No one knew how long it had been. Qin Feiyang lost his balance and fell into the mud. "Feiyang!" The white-clothed woman's body and mind trembled. She quickly squatted down and helped Qin Feiyang to sit on the ground. His body and face were covered in mud, but it couldn't hide his weakness. "Mother, I'm sorry." He looked at the white-clothed woman and smiled apologetically. His voice became hoarse, pale, and weak. "I'm the one who should be sorry." The white-clothed woman hugged Qin Feiyang, crying bitterly. "Mother, if there is an afterlife, I still want to be your child again," Qin Feiyang muttered. He could clearly feel that his life force was rapidly dissipating. He couldn't even muster the strength to speak. But at this moment, his heart was especially warm and peaceful. "Good, good, good." The white-clothed woman nodded repeatedly, tears gushing out like a spring. "Thank you, mother." The rain hit Qin Feiyang's face, washing away the mud on his face, revealing a pale face. But there was a bright smile on that face. There was no more blood on his body, because the blood in his body had already flowed out. His consciousness was being swallowed by darkness. Chapter 927. Tyrannical Hegemony? The emperor suddenly became angry and shouted, "Who do you think you are? What right do you have to teach me a lesson?" The masked old man sighed deeply, his old eyes full of disappointment. Whoosh! He stepped in front of the white-clothed woman, looked at Qin Feiyang and bowed. "My lord, this old man will take you away." "My lord." Everyone present was once again deeply shocked. This terrifying old man actually called Qin Feiyang's mother my lord? Didn't this mean that this man was Qin Feiyang's mother's subordinate? The white-clothed woman looked up at the masked old man and said, "It's you. I'm sorry. I didn't tell you my identity immediately, and I didn't stop Feiyang in time." The masked old man said. The white-clothed woman shook her head and said, "You have your reasons for doing this. I won't blame you." As she spoke, she carried Qin Feiyang, got up, and glanced at the imperial palace. When he was alive, Feiyang hated this place the most. "I hope that after he dies, you can find a pure land for him to bury. Don't let his soul be disturbed again. Now I'll entrust this matter to you." The white-clothed woman handed Qin Feiyang to the masked old man. The masked old man took Qin Feiyang and asked, "What about you? You know I can't leave." The white-clothed woman shook her head. Sigh. The masked old man looked at the white-clothed woman for a long time. After a long sigh, he turned and flew into the sky. Whoosh! But at this time, Yiglao and the middle-aged man instantly stood in front of the masked old man. Yiglao said in a deep voice, "You can leave if you want to, but you have to leave Qin Feiyang here." The emperor glanced at Yiglao and the middle-aged man, then looked at old Qin, and the three fake gods whose faces could not be seen clearly. He shouted, "Don't let them take Qin Feiyang away." Whoosh! The four of them immediately surrounded the masked old man, Yiglao, and the middle-aged man, their eyes flashing fiercely. "Do we really have to fight before we can leave? However, if this old man were to act, someone would definitely die today." The masked old man looked at the gods with disdain, not showing the slightest fear. Die. No matter if it was Yiglao or Qin Wentian and the other three. When they heard the words of the masked old man, a cold sneer appeared in their eyes. They were all false divinities, yet they still dared to boast like that. How foolish. Boom! The six of them unleashed their auras and attacked the masked old man. The masked old man narrowed his eyes, revealing an extremely dangerous signal. It was like a sleeping lion that was about to awaken. But suddenly, the masked old man withdrew his gaze and lowered his head to look at Qin Feiyang in his arms. His eyes trembled slightly. Seeing this, Yiglao and the others raised their eyebrows and looked at Qin Feiyang. Immediately, the six of them narrowed their eyes. The stone statue was about 100 feet tall. It shone with a dazzling purple-gold divine light. How's this possible? Looking at the stone statue, the current emperor shook his head frantically. His eyes were filled with disbelief. The stone statue's face was well-defined and carried a strong sense of vicissitudes. One could tell at a glance that it was a middle-aged man. His eyes were bright like the eyes of the heavens. They seemed to be able to see through all things and the world's origin energy. He was holding a sword in his hand. However, it was not a complete sword. It was a broken sword. There was no tip of the sword. Although the broken sword was only a stone statue, everyone could still feel the terrifying sharpness. They felt that as long as this person waved the sword, the world would shatter. Why did this stone statue appear? Old Qin and the other false gods, the commander of the Kirin army, Zhuge Mingyang, and everyone in the imperial palace turned pale with fright. This figure, this face, this broken sword, they were all too familiar with it. It had even been imprinted in the depths of their souls, and could never be forgotten. Because the owner of this stone statue was the first emperor, who founded the Great Qin Empire, and left behind a world-shaking reputation. Moreover, this stone statue was exactly the same as the god statue worshipped by the mermaid clan. Its body that was over 30 meters tall was like a towering mountain, and it emitted an aura that made one feel despair. Qin Feiyang, quickly answer me. Why did the ancestors' god statue appear here? Suddenly, the emperor retracted his gaze and looked at Qin Feiyang, who was floating in the air, and roared hysterically. The Great Qin Empire had been around for tens of thousands of years. However, this was the first time that the god statue of the first emperor appeared. And this must have something to do with Qin Feiyang. However, Qin Feiyang closed his eyes tightly and did not give any answer to the emperor. If this child did not fall out with his majesty, he would definitely be the most suitable candidate for the next emperor. But now, we must not let him live. Otherwise, in the future, it will definitely affect the fate of our Great Qin Empire. Old Qin and the other false gods looked at each other, and a cold light surged in their eyes. They rushed towards Qin Feiyang at the same time. They were full of murderous intent. How dare you? The masked old man roared. Yiglao and the middle-aged man hurriedly chased to stop them. But after all, they were all false gods. As for old man Qin and the other three, they suddenly attacked without any warning. Therefore, it was too late for the masked old man and Yiglao to stop the four of them. As expected, Qin Feiyang would definitely be killed by the four of them. At the same time, in less than 100 breaths of time, his cultivation had returned to its peak state. 9 Star Wars sect. But it did not stop there. His aura was still rising, as if he was about to break through the shackles and step into the Battle Saint realm. At this moment, his eyelids twitched, and then he suddenly opened his eyes. 2 rays of light shot out. His eyes didn't change much. They were still the same as before, dark and deep. However, his weakness had already disappeared. Just as he opened his eyes, a muffled explosion rang out from within his body. Boom! The aura around his body suddenly increased by several times. A shocking saint aura also surged out of his body. What? Not only did he not die, he even benefited from a disaster and broke through to the battle saint realm? Everyone was dumbstruck. Especially Zhuge Mingyang. His expression was extremely ugly. Back then, when Qin Feiyang had just entered the shrine, he was only a 1-star battle master. At that time, he was already a 9-star battle master, a full 8 small realms apart. But it had only been a few years, and he had already caught up to him? At this rate, surpassing him was only a matter of time. Am I not dead? What's going on with my cultivation? At the same time, Qin Feiyang muttered to himself as he lay in the air. The light in his eyes had already dissipated and was replaced by a trace of confusion. Soon, he noticed the purple-gold divine light around his body, and the confusion in his eyes became even stronger. What was this? Why did it give him a very comfortable feeling? And his entire body was warm. Ancestor. When his gaze swept past the stone statue, it was the same as the emperor and the others' reaction. It was filled with shock. After a long while he came back to his senses. He immediately sensed a familiar aura. Mother's aura. Mu Qing's aura. And the aura of an emperor. Looks like I didn't die yet. Qin Feiyang muttered, the corner of his mouth pursing into a bitter smile. He had thought that he would definitely die after crippling his own bloodline, but he didn't expect that he would survive. What was even more unexpected was that he would experience 2 life and death tribulations in one day. He looked at the statue of the first emperor and muttered, "Did you save me?" The statue stood tall in the sky, like an ancient emperor looking down on the common people. Next, Qin Feiyang retracted his gaze and sank his mind into his body. Looking at the purple-gold blood flowing in his body, his expression suddenly became dull. How did the blood become this color? Purple-gold blood, purple-gold divine light. Could it be the ancestor again? He raised his head to look at the stone statue again, his eyes full of surprise. Suddenly, the statue of the first emperor began to collapse, turning into a gorgeous rain of light. Roar! Following closely, accompanied by a loud dragon roar, a purple-gold divine dragon rushed out of the rain of light. This is Qin Feiyang's eyes widened. This purple-gold divine dragon, although alive, was not made of flesh and blood. Wasn't this his purple-gold dragon soul? Qin Feiyang understood. Back then, he had opened the purple-gold dragon soul in the mermaid clan's holy land because of the ancestors' approval. Although the statue in the Holy Land was carved from stone, it contained the ancestors' will. So, his purple-gold dragon soul also had a trace of the ancestors' will. And now, when he was in danger, the ancestors' will appeared and saved him from danger. In other words, the statue he saw before was formed by the ancestors' will. Thank you, ancestor. From this moment on, I will cherish my life. Thinking of this, Qin Feiyang stood up and bowed 3 times in the direction where the statue disappeared. Not only did the ancestor save him, but he also helped him break through to the battle saint realm. It could be said that he was given a great fortune, and he had a premonition that the purple-gold blood in his body was definitely not simple. Therefore, he was extremely grateful to the first emperor. Immediately, he looked at the purple-gold dragon soul again and smiled. Thank you too. Roar. The purple-gold dragon soul let out a long roar, turned into a waterfall, and fused into Qin Feiyang's body. And just as the purple-gold dragon soul entered his body, his expression was slightly stunned. In his mind, a huge amount of information emerged. This information was very unfamiliar to him. What is it? Qin Feiyang calmed down and checked the information. Soon, a trace of bewilderment crept up in his eyes. This was actually a cultivation method of a battle art, called the Divine Dragon Art. Divine Dragon Art? Qin Feiyang frowned. Why did this name sound so familiar? Suddenly, his body trembled violently, and his face instantly revealed a look of ecstasy. He finally realized why the Divine Dragon Art gave him a sense of familiarity. Because this Divine Dragon Art was the battle art created by the first emperor. When he was young, he sneaked into the emperor's study and read an ancient history book. In this ancient history book, there was some information about the first emperor. Although there wasn't much information recorded, there was one thing that was clearly written. Back then, when the first emperor conquered the world, in addition to his own strength, he also controlled a super terrifying battle art. This battle art was the divine dragon art. According to the records, the power of this divine dragon art had already surpassed the limits of a perfect battle art. Back then, many of the tyrants who dominated a region were defeated by this divine dragon art. There were even records that the previous emperor of the Tianyang Empire, Mu Tianyang, was also defeated by the divine dragon art. One could imagine how terrifying this divine dragon art was. The masked old man smiled and said, "Actually, even if you don't tell me, this old man knows." You know, Qin Feiyang looked at him suspiciously. The masked old man smiled faintly and said, "The mermaid clan's holy land, right?" What? Qin Feiyang's body trembled violently, and his eyes were full of horror. He actually knew. Everyone thought that the Qin emperor didn't leave the cultivation method of the divine dragon technique. But in fact, he did leave it. It's just that he left the inheritance of the divine dragon technique in the statue of the mermaid clan, waiting for a lucky descendant to inherit it. Coincidentally, you went to the mermaid clan and obtained this complete inheritance. Perhaps it's not a coincidence that you can obtain this inheritance. It's the result that the Qin emperor had long expected. The masked old man sighed, and there was an inexplicable emotion in his tone. Expected result? You mean the first emperor had expected that I would go to the mermaid clan 10,000 years ago? Qin Feiyang frowned. That's right. The masked old man nodded. Qin Feiyang didn't believe it. He knew that the first emperor was very strong, but to predict the future, this was simply a fantasy. One had to know. At that time, he wasn't even born. The masked old man glanced at Qin Feiyang, shook his head, and said with a smile, "This old man can only tell you that the strength of the Qin emperor is not something you can imagine." Then tell me, I have activated the purple gold dragon soul for so long. Why did I only get the inheritance of the divine dragon technique today? Qin Feiyang said. This old man has already said before that to cultivate the divine dragon technique, you must have the purple gold dragon blood. In the past, although you were also a descendant of the Qin emperor, you didn't really inherit the bloodline power of the Qin emperor. To put it bluntly, in the past, you were not qualified to inherit this inheritance. The masked old man said. Qin Feiyang suddenly understood. The purple gold dragon blood was a necessary factor to cultivate the divine dragon technique. Without the purple gold dragon blood, it was naturally impossible. The masked old man continued. And this inheritance left by the Qin emperor is also a test. Test? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Yes. Put yourself in a desperate situation and fight to live. Not everyone dares to cripple their own bloodline power. Especially a monster like you. Because the more talented a person is, the more they cherish their bloodline power. The masked old man said. I agree with this point. If not for the current emperor forcing me to this point, I wouldn't have done such a stupid thing like destroying my own bloodline power. Qin Feiyang sighed. Do you hate him? No, actually you should thank him. If not for him forcing you, would you be able to awaken the purple gold dragon blood? Maybe you won't be able to awaken it in this lifetime. If you can't awaken the purple gold dragon blood, you won't be able to get the inheritance of the Qin emperor. The masked old man smiled. Grateful, Qin Feiyang smiled coldly and asked, this purple gold dragon blood, other than being able to cultivate the divine dragon technique, does it have any other benefits? Of course. The most obvious one is your talent. After awakening the purple gold dragon blood, your talent and comprehension will increase exponentially. Your cultivation speed will at least be twice as fast as your current foundation. As for the other benefits, it's not convenient for me to say too much. I'll leave it to you to slowly discover. The masked old man said. Qin Feiyang was extremely excited. Putting aside his talent and comprehension, just his cultivation speed. After opening the door of potential, his cultivation speed was already very shocking. But now he was actually able to double the speed on top of that. For example, He needed 1 year to cultivate from a 1-star battle saint to a 2-star battle saint. But now he only needed half a year. This kind of speed was simply shocking to death. How do you know so clearly? Who are you? And why do you give me a familiar yet strange feeling? Qin Feiyang looked at the masked old man, his eyes full of confusion. Don't worry too much about this old man's identity. You'd better think about how to make the emperor sign that unfair contract. After all, if you can't make him agree, you won't be able to roam the forgotten continent in peace. The masked old man pondered for a while and smiled. Qin Feiyang frowned. He asked secretly, Senior, do you have any ideas? If you use the royal tutor or the young prince to threaten him, there's no doubt that it'll be a long tug of war. After all, he's the emperor of a nation. He won't be able to put down his pride in front of so many people. You can try another method. Who knows, it might be more effective than this one. The masked old man said. Try another method. Qin Feiyang muttered to himself. After a while he cupped his fists and said, Thank you for your advice, Senior. Huff. Next, he exhaled deeply. With a thought, the 9-leaf fire lotus and the crimson sword soul that were protecting him returned to his sea of qi. His gaze also turned cold and sharp. No matter what he had gone through, at least he had achieved his wish. From now on, he would have nothing to do with the emperor. Swoosh. He lowered his head and looked at the crowd below. Finally, his gaze fell on the emperor. His expression was no longer filled with pain and sadness. Instead, it was cold. It was as though he was looking at a stranger. Do you know what this is? Qin Feiyang waved his arm. The divine dragon seal hovering before him immediately expanded in the wind. Streams of terrifying aura surged out crazily, covering the sky and covering the earth as they rushed in all directions. Rumble. Finally. If Qin Feiyang took out these two artifacts, Zhuge Mingyang wouldn't even have the slightest resistance. So, he wanted to put an end to this situation. Qin Feiyang glanced at the emperor and said lightly, You worry too much, just Zhuge Mingyang. I don't need to use weapons. Arrogant. Zhuge Mingyang was furious. With the billowing saint's aura, he took a step forward, raised his fist, and threw a punch at Qin Feiyang. Yes, I am arrogant. Because I am no longer the Qin Feiyang of the past. Qin Feiyang roared, raised his arm, and threw a punch without dodging. Boom! The two fists met with a loud bang. A destructive airwave, like a tide, rolled out in all directions with the two of them as the center. At this moment, the void within a few miles twisted crazily, as if it was about to shatter. Humph! The two of them snorted at the same time, and their bodies retreated uncontrollably. I remember that in the Black Dragon Swamp, you forced us into a desperate situation with your own strength, and almost killed us. But now, is this all you've got? Qin Feiyang stepped into the void, stabilized his body, and then roared and rushed toward Zhuge Mingyang again. I only hate that I didn't kill you back then. Zhuge Mingyang's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He pushed his hands out, and a majestic battle chi roared out. That battle chi was very special. It was green in color. At first glance, it looked like an ancient green dragon, roaring in the sky, containing a shocking destructive force. And that battle chi also exuded a strong dragon's aura. What? Qin Feiyang's pupils contracted. As everyone knew, the aura of battle chi was based on the battle soul. Battle chi that contained dragon's aura. Could it be that Zhuge Mingyang had also activated some kind of dragon soul? Boom! He clenched his fist, and the flaming battle chi surged out. At this moment, his whole body was burning with raging flames, as if he had turned into a man of fire. I would like to see how capable you are. Immediately, Qin Feiyang squinted his eyes, and a sharp light flashed, and he punched toward Zhuge Mingyang's battle chi. Accompanied by a loud bang, the roaring battle chi was dispersed. This dragon's aura, Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled. After activating the purple gold dragon soul and purple gold dragon blood, he was very sensitive to dragon's aura. When he touched Zhuge Mingyang's battle chi, he could clearly feel that the dragon's aura contained in the battle chi was not an ordinary dragon's aura. The dragon's aura was very pure, and it gave people a strong sense of oppression. Battle Monarch 10. Battle Emperor 20. Battle Master 30. Now that he had broken through to the Battle Saint level, he could form 40 sword shadows. 40 sword shadows were equivalent to 40 killing moves. This was not something that an ordinary person could bear. It could even be said that even if one's cultivation level was higher than Qin Feiyang's, they might not be able to bear it. In short, the higher Qin Feiyang's cultivation level, the more terrifying the power of the Guiyuan sword technique. Clang! When the 40 sword shadows appeared, Qin Feiyang controlled a sword shadow and slashed at the light beam. Boom! Crack! Accompanied by a loud sound, the sword shadow was instantly shattered by the light beam. Qin Feiyang's body trembled, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. In his heart, he was also quite surprised. Once, he had also faced many strong enemies. For example, in the 9 Nether Yellow Springs, he fought with the monsters of the 9 prefectures. The methods of these monsters were obvious to everyone, but as long as their cultivation level was not higher than Qin Feiyang's, they would not be able to block the Guiyuan sword technique. However, at this moment, that beam of light seemed to have destroyed one of his sword shadows effortlessly, but its power was not just ordinary frightening. I said the good show is yet to come. Looking at Qin Feiyang's shocked expression, Zhuge Mingyang's eyes revealed a trace of disdain. Isn't it a bit too early to be complacent? Qin Feiyang sneered, and the sword shadows above his head slashed at the light beam one after another. Clang! The sword shadows kept shattering. Waves of destructive air waves rolled out in all directions like a tide. The void within a radius of dozens of miles was crazily distorted. Even the sky was trembling. Qin Feiyang stood in the void, and his face was getting paler and paler. Because every time a sword shadow was shattered, his body would suffer a heavy blow. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. But he was like Mount Tai, motionless. Look at Zhuge Mingyang. Although he had the upper hand, there was not a trace of joy on his face. Even the disdain he showed before had disappeared, and was replaced by a trace of seriousness. And if one looked carefully, one would find that his hands on his chest were slightly trembling. It was obvious. Those sword shadows also caused him a lot of pressure. Boom! When the 20th sword shadow slashed at the light beam finally collapsed. Puff! The azure dragon's eye was also shattered. Zhuge Mingyang also spat out a mouthful of blood. I'd like to see how you're going to take the remaining 20 sword shadows. Qin Feiyang sneered. The 20 sword shadows all moved in an instant and slashed at Zhuge Mingyang. Looking at this scene, the emperor's heart sank. We can't let him die in the hands of Qin Feiyang. Let him admit defeat quickly. Yes, if he is trained well, he will definitely do something in the future. In the future, he may even be the only one who can stop Qin Feiyang. Elder Qin and the other fake gods were secretly transmitting voice messages to the emperor, looking extremely anxious. The emperor was in a dilemma, but in the end, he listened to Elder Qin and the others and shouted, Zhuge Mingyang, I order you to admit defeat immediately. Admit defeat? Hearing this, Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. Instead of stopping, he used the phantom steps to maximize his speed. No matter what, he had to kill this person today. However, Zhuge Mingyang did not show any signs of admitting defeat at all. His eyes were sharper than before. Boom! Suddenly, he stepped into the void, stabilized his body, looked down at the emperor and said, Your Majesty, I'm sorry I can't obey. How dare you? The emperor was angry. I, Zhuge Mingyang, have never admitted defeat in my life. Especially in front of Qin Feiyang. I can't admit defeat. Zhuge Mingyang said word by word, his eyes filled with determination. Finished. He ignored the emperor and looked up at Qin Feiyang shouting, Today one of you must die here. Qin Feiyang coldly smiled and said, That's what I think too. Then let's fight. Zhuge Mingyang was so angry that his hair stood on end. A terrifying dragon's might roared out from his body. Roar! Immediately after, a behemoth rushed out from behind him. That divine dragon was hundreds of feet long, covered with blue dragon scales the size of a dustpan, and 4 dragon claws under its abdomen, obviously hard and powerful. Azure Dragon. Qin Feiyang's pupils shrank. According to legend, in ancient times, there were 4 divine beasts that could overturn rivers and seas, and cover the sky with one hand. They were the azure dragon, white tiger, black tortoise and vermilion bird. Although these four divine beasts were not as powerful as the purple gold divine dragon, in the eyes of the world, they were godlike existences. Who would have thought that Zhuge Mingyang would actually activate the Azure Dragon Fighting Soul? Azure Dragon Fighting Soul, coupled with the powerful Azure Dragon secret art. This Zhuge Mingyang was simply impeccable. Roar. Looking at the roaring Azure Dragon Fighting Soul in the sky, many people felt a sense of awe. But Qin Feiyang, on the other hand, was boiling with battle intent. Clang. With a giant sword that could tear the sky and earth apart, a red sword soul appeared. Kill! Both of them shouted at the same time. The Azure Dragon Fighting Soul and the Red Sword Soul pierced through the sky, crazily colliding in the void. The dragon might was torrential, and the sword radiance was boundless. The two fighting souls carried the will of their respective masters, competing against each other, neither of them wanting to be at a disadvantage.